Sometimes when you shoot an image, the light just isn't quite as vibrant as you would hope. In this shot here, we have some nice tonality. There's highlights, shadows, there's definition on the photographer, but overall it's just a bit dull. So by adding a burst of fake sunlight in Photoshop, we can hopefully create something that looks fairly realistic, but also lifts the image and really brings it to life. So here is the effect grouped together, so you can just see how adding that burst of light really works to lift this image up. And the reason we've created it up in the left hand corner is because naturally the light is coming from the left. If the photographer was on the other side and the light was coming from the right hand side, it would make much more sense to create the burst of sunlight up in the right hand corner. And one thing that you really need to consider is that for this technique to work, you need to have sky in the image. You can't have a subject that's standing against a wall, for instance, because the sun wouldn't burst in the same way. So for the best result, always make sure that the sky is clearly visible like it is here. So let's just delete these layers and then we can get started with the technique. So the first thing we need to do is create a gradient. So go down to the adjustment layer icon at the bottom of the layers panel and select gradient from the list of options. And by default, it always opens up with the style set to linear. So we're just going to change that to radial to give us a nice circular gradient. And then I'm just going to hit dither because that helps to remove any banding in the gradient for a more natural result. And for this first one, I'm just going to take the scale up to 200% to make it nice and big. Now I don't want it to be white. The color of the gradient will be whatever you have your foreground color set to, but that doesn't matter because we can change that now. So just single left mouse click on the gradient, which will bring up the gradient editor, and then double click on the bottom left hand point here, and that will open up the color picker. If you had black as your foreground color, you may just find that the color picker is black. So if that's the case, just click on the hue option here and that will bring the colors up for you. So for this first gradient, we're going to go for a nice vibrant orange. So that looks about right. So I'm just going to hit OK on the color picker, OK on the gradient editor. And now while the gradient fill dialog is open, if I left mouse click and drag that gradient around, I can move it around. You can't do this once the dialog is closed down. So if you need to come back and move any gradients, you always have to open the gradient fill dialog for that particular layer. So that's all done. Let's just hit OK and then change the blending mode from normal to screen, which is a lighten blending mode. And you see there that gives us the first step of our bright burst of sunlight. So next up we just need to create another gradient, and once again we'll change the style to radial, make sure that dither is selected, and this time we'll set the scale to 120%, and then I'm just going to single left mouse click on the gradient, double click on the bottom left hand point, and this time I'm going to go for a nice bright yellow. Let's go for something that's slightly brighter than that. So something around there is going to work. So we'll just close all of that down. And then now I can move that into position and then hit OK once happy. And once again, change the blending mode from normal to screen. And you'll see there that the sunlight is slowly building. And we just need to create one more gradient just to finish off the hot spot in the center of that sunburst. So if we just go down to the adjustment layer icon again, choose gradient. So as white is my foreground color, that's naturally coming up. Before you do this, if you have any other colors set, you can just hit D on the keyboard, which will set the default palette colors of black and white. If black is in the foreground, just hit X and that will toggle between the two and then create your gradient adjustment layer. So let's just change the style to radial. This time I'm going to go for 80%, hit dither, and I want it to be a white gradient this time, so I'm going to leave the color as it is and then just drag that up into the top left hand corner and hit OK. And also, this time I would like it to be pure white, so I'm going to leave the blending mode set to normal. But as things are, the overall effect still doesn't look quite right. It's a bit garish up here in the sky, so with that top gradient fill selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and click on Gradient Fill 1, and then hold down Control and G, or it would be Command and G on a Mac, so I can group those layers, and then I'm going to double click on the name Group 1 and change it to Sunburst, just so I know what that layer group actually is. And now I'm just going to take the opacity of that group down to 80% just to reduce the effect and achieve a slightly more natural looking effect. So we're getting there, not quite there yet, but things are coming together. So next up we need to introduce some haze, which you would typically get if you had the sun in the shot, and also to lighten the image. So we're going to create a levels adjustment layer, and then I'm going to take this black output point over to 30. Usually an amount of anywhere between 20 and 30 works really well. And then I'm just going to brighten the image up. So I'm going to drag that mid-tone point over to the left to 1.20. Let's just have a look at the before and after. You'll see how that really lifts the whole image up and just kind of finishes that burst effect. So I'm just going to double click on levels 1 and rename this layer as haze so I know what it is at a glance. And to finish off, we are going to add a touch of lens flare. So for this, we're going to create an empty new layer. So I'm going to hold down Control, Shift and N. So on a Mac, that would be Command, Shift and N. And we can name this layer Flare and change the mode from normal to overlay. And then we can check the fill with overlay neutral color 50% gray and just hit OK. And then next up, we need to go to Filter, Render, Lens Flare. And here we have several different options. The one that I tend to use most is the 35mm prime, and we can just move this point around. Normally, if you were working on the background layer, you'd be able to see the image underneath, but because we're working non-destructively, I've created this grey layer where the effect will still be visible, but we just have to kind of guess a little bit. So I'm going to place the bright point up in the left hand corner, so it's up here where the sun we created earlier on is. 35mm prime is selected, and then I'm going to take the brightness up to 140% and then just hit OK, and there you'll see that renders that lens flare for us. So the reason we don't create a burst of sunlight just using lens flare is that it just doesn't look quite natural. But then by creating our own sunburst and haze and combining it with the flare, we get a much more natural looking result overall.